Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and today I'm very excited to be taking a look at the brand new Star Wars Dark Forces Remastered. There was a time back in the early to mid 90s where us old school Star Wars fans, we were kind of starved for new content. You have to remember that this was before the prequel movies were made, and it was long after the original trilogy. I remember when we first got Star Wars TIE Fighter and also Rebel Assault. These new entries into the Star Wars universe were amazing at the time. But it was Star Wars Dark Forces that really got people excited because it took this brand new genre of first-person shooters that were, made popular by games like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, and then molded it into the Star Wars universe. Dark Forces was definitely a classic. I loved it at the time, and now we're getting a brand new remastered version from Night Dive Studios. Now, this game was originally released back in 1995 for MS-DOS and also Mac OS. That's the version that I have still in my collection, as well as the original PlayStation 1. But for this review, I'm going to be checking out the Steam version, courtesy of a review code that I got from the developer. So what can you expect from this? Well, you're going to get some upgraded HD visuals that frankly look a lot better than the original version of this, as you would expect, right? Basically, they're bumping this game up to 4K, and you also get some higher frame rates, so this will support up to 120 frames per second. You also get to run it in widescreen, and there's enhanced lighting and also true 3D. So this is using Night Dive's own proprietary engine to do real 3D here. But they went a step beyond that because this game has some FMV elements in there where it tells the story. So they also re-rendered these cinematics in HD, and they used all new kind of updated assets for that. Getting ready for this review, I actually went back and played a bit of the original Steam version of the game, and it was interesting because I had forgotten that you actually had to use the page up and page down to look up and down. It wasn't very intuitive at all. And so, my memory of the game is actually a little bit clouded. I remember it being so easy to do, but not nearly as easy as in the brand new version here, where, as you can see, it's completely, you have free mouse look here where you can just do whatever you want, which again is really nice bonus here. As you might expect, there are a bunch of accessibility options that have been added to this release, including you can now change the control binding and also mouse options. I think one of the big ones that people are probably going to turn off is the head or view bobbing. So the original, I remember, would make some of my friends kind of motion sick because it would bob your head as you walked in this game or ran in this game. And as far as I can tell, at least through the menu system, you couldn't turn that off on the original release. Well, now you can, and actually for this entire video here, I am going to disable that. So again, I don't want people puking when they watch this. So that's a nice touch. You can also change things like the weapon and HUD flashing, which is something I can see people kind of finding annoying in this game, so you don't have to necessarily leave it on. You can also adjust the crosshairs to your liking, as well as the menu speeds and a ton more. They also added something called the Vault to this release, which has a bunch of really cool stuff for fans of the game. The big feature here is probably going to be, for most people, the playable prototype level that takes place on a Star Destroyer. So this was originally a demo that they created for when they showed the game at the Consumer Electronics Show back in the day, but they decided to cut it because, well, it was deemed a little bit too difficult for new players. But now you get to play it and check it out here. And it's a little rough, I'm not gonna lie. You can actually see through the floor sometimes, so it's not complete. Again, they are very clear it's a prototype, and it is shockingly tough. It ramps up pretty quick, but it's a cool little bonus. Also in the vault are a bunch of game development documents. So you see original AutoCAD files right here. You also have 3D Studio renders. You have deluxe paint animations. You've got some original artist sketches, some early design ideas, and a bunch more. There's also some early concept art in here, as well as the section here where they break down some of the cutscenes and how they were using rotoscoping with real people to try to make them more realistic. So yeah, it's pretty cool digging in here again, especially if you're a fan or if you're just interested in game development, especially back in the mid 90s. It's pretty cool. One thing I love that developers do with some of these classic remasters is they give you the ability to switch back and forth between the original and the new remastered version anytime you want on the fly. It's always shocking to me, right? Because in my mind, I remember this game being absolutely mind-blowing, visuals, gorgeous, and it still is cool today, of course, but man, switching back and forth, it's like, it kind of hits you, it's amazing how far graphics have come. Of course, this is a modern remaster, so they have to add in some achievements, which is really cool. So those pop up every once in a while when you're playing the game. You see here, I got the Smells Like Progress achievement. I mentioned that I went back and played a little bit of the original to kind of refresh my memory a bit for this review. And one of the things that immediately stood out was the change in the music. I absolutely love the original MIDI soundtrack for this game. It just has a retro sound that just, I don't know, just kind of brings me back to that time. And I noticed that it's definitely changed for this new one. And so I reached out to Night Dive. I was like, how did you do that? Because in my opinion, actually, it sounds really good in the new version, but it's also different. And back in the 90s, depending on the sound card that you own and put in your computer, you could get a very different musical experience when they were dealing with MIDI. So I was kind of curious how they created that for this new version of it. And so they basically used a Roland SC55 sound canvas to create the soundtrack for the new version. It's still that classic MIDI sounding music that we all know and love from the original, but I can tell that the audio samples are a little bit better, maybe a little bit higher resolution, maybe a little bit more accurate, especially when it comes to the percussion. And so I'll compare these side by side for you so you can kind of hear the differences. Now, when I first got a review code for this game, I did notice that the tempo on the new version was off a little bit. However, you don't have to worry about that because by the time that the game comes out and you download it, there is a day one patch that fixes all that. So yes, there are slight differences between the old version and the new music, but I don't know if people are really going to notice when you're in the heat of battle. And there are two sound options you can choose between General MIDI and OPL3, so you can choose whichever one that you prefer. Replaying the game for this review is really interesting because I haven't played the original in several decades, probably. It's been a while. And one thing that really struck me is that this game is very old school in its level design. It feels very maze-like, and you can easily get lost. And I remember thinking that when I first played the game when it came out back in the 90s. But today, it's very obvious, I think, as to why, and that is just because the levels and the textures, there's not a lot of variety going on here. It's really easy to get turned around and lost because, again, so much of these levels look just like every other part of the same level, and you're just not sure where to go and what to do. Now, the good news is, and this is very important because you're going to use it, is that it's got a really good map that you can bring up anytime over the gameplay. And so that helps a lot. You're going to be using that a lot. But just be aware, you're still going to be getting lost a lot in this game. You're just going to wander around wondering where should you go next. And that brings me to a complaint, or perhaps a little bit of a missed opportunity here. I do wish that the developers would have added a little bit more detail to these, otherwise pretty barren levels. Especially on some of the outdoor levels, I think they could have added some foliage or plants or something that would be appropriate where they could kind of just throw stuff around to kind of like mix it up a little bit. Now, I get that the original was, very simple, very sparse, probably due to limitations on the hardware at the time. Totally understandable. But, all these years later, It's very glaring, and I don't think anyone really would have complained had they added a little bit of that into this version of it, especially since we're just calling it a remaster and they're updating the textures anyways. That would have been a nice touch, and again, would have gone a long ways into making some of these levels not feel so empty. But, you know, they're probably going for accuracy here, and, you know, I could see people complaining one way or the other. They could have even made it an option in the menu, but, and also too, I mean, maybe at some point they're gonna remake it, right? Kind of like what they did with System Shock. Either way, you're gonna notice it when you play this game, especially when you get further into the game and you get into some of those deeper levels. It's gonna start feeling kind of sparse. The story of this game is pretty cool. So you play as a former Imperial officer who has become a mercenary that's now working for the Rebel Alliance. His name is Kyle Katarn. And of course the game has to start with that classic Star Wars text scrawl, but even there, you're gonna notice that just how much sharper it is compared to the original. And the first level of this game is actually Kyle stealing the plans for the Death Star, which will allow them to destroy it. And then what happens is, a little bit later, the Rebel Alliance comes back to him because they get wind that there is a new Imperial soldier that is basically has the ability to wipe out entire cities. So they're going to use Kyle to try to figure out what this new deadly threat is and ultimately try to figure out this thing called the Dark Trooper Project. Basically from there, your goal is to try to learn more about this project, try to stop it, and you're going to be flying all around the galaxy. This actually has 14 levels, and you're going to be on spaceships, you're going to be on planets. You're also going to bump into some of the popular figures from the Star Wars universe. Now, the really interesting thing about these games is that they're not actually considered official canon at this point, especially since Disney bought the franchise and kind of rebooted everything after 2014. For instance, I mentioned that Kyle, stole the plans for the Death Star. Well, we all know that that's not official, right? That's not how it officially happened. And so it's really interesting going back and replaying these games because now they're technically called Legends. That's what Disney has called these older stories. But either way, actually, I kind of enjoy revisiting these because they kind of function as a what if scenario in the Star Wars universe. I really dig that. So if you couldn't tell, I absolutely loved my time playing this new remastered version of Star Wars Dark Forces. I loved the original back in the day. It's considered a classic and also one of the best Star Wars games, frankly, ever made. And it's really cool that Night Dive Studios has taken the time to do a remastered version of this. You can feel the love here. You can definitely tell that they took a lot of time remaking this for modern gamers, modern hardware, and it really shows. You can tell that they love the game. So if you're interested in checking this game out, it's going to be available pretty much everywhere like all their other releases. So you're going to be able to get it on Steam, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series X and S, the Xbox One, and of course the Switch. I'll put a link down to their website below, and let me know down in the comments, guys, if you played this game back in the day and if you're excited to check it out. And also, would you like to see a remake of this, like a modern remake of it? And while we're at it, Rebel Assault, that would be pretty cool, right? Update that one. I don't know, maybe I'm asking for too much here, but I think that would be pretty cool. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.